Story 1. Until 2020, it was punishable by 5 years in prison if you'd mock the King of the Netherlands. This was a completely useless law because the king is basically a cartoon parody of what a member of a royal family should be, so satirists had a field day with him. But technically speaking, all those people could have been thrown in jail if the law were to be followed. Story 2. Egypt's Penal Code Article 237 provides that a man who surprises his wife committing adultery and who kills her and the person committing adultery with her benefits from a reduced penalty not to exceed 3 years in prison. Story 3. Not sure if this is still the case, but just a few years ago in Iran, gay men were required to undergo sex change operations against their will. Once they became women, they were allowed to marry and live as women. But again, they had no choice in the matter. Many of them committed suicide afterward. Story 4. One weird one is that if you are a foreign woman in Finland, you can be deported on suspicion of prostitution. Mind you, prostitution is not illegal in Finland and was historically illegal only between the 1880s and 1937. You do not have to commit any crime or be convicted of anything. A simple suspicion is enough. Story 5. As far as I am aware, the state of California recently changed knowingly giving someone human immunodeficiency virus from a felony to a misdemeanor. The state of Michigan allows open carry of firearms, likely because of the hunting industry, but treats carrying a knife with a false edge or a second edge the same as an unregistered handgun. I suppose these are not brutal, but they seem insane to me. Story 6. Here in Brazil, we have a holiday release program where felons can get out of jail for a day on special days. It seems nice on the surface, but plenty of murderers and rapists commit more crimes while on it, never mind the ones who escape. Don't even get me started on someone who murdered their mother being allowed out on Mother's Day. Story 7. Not so much insane or brutal as funny. For a while, restaurants couldn't serve margarine or butter substitutes unless the customer specifically requested it. As dairy is big in Wisconsin, there's no law regarding drinking and riding a horse. You can still get charged with other things, but not a DUI. I thought this changed in the past few years when someone passed out on the horse and fell off in the snow, dying due to the weather as the horse carried on home, but I guess not. That said, I have lived in the Middle East and North Africa for a majority of my adult life. Anything related to the LGBTQ community could land you in jail or result in the death penalty. Before I left Qatar, a British national was arrested for homosexual activity, as he tried to meet a supposedly gay man on a dating app. That's right, their police and internal security services are so inept at actual police work they make gay dating profiles to catfish and arrest homosexuals. Funny thing is, I know of quite a few individuals that are Allah-fearing, fob-wearing good Muslims in public. Behind closed doors, it's another story. Male gay third-country nationals often make dating profiles but put their gender as female-seeking male as some sort of plausible deniability. Also, disrespecting Islam or Muhammad leads straight to jail or death. Story 8. Not brutal but kind of weird. Our best and brightest leaders decided to deal with traffic congestion by banning cars on certain days depending on their license plate number. License plates that end in 1 and 2 are banned on Mondays and 3 and 4 on Tuesdays and so on. The most annoying part is that it only affected the middle class, since the rich just bought multiple cars to go around it. Story 9. In Germany, there are often far too low penalties for rape, bodily injury, and negligent homicide, while tax evasion can land you in jail for several years. Story 10. In Louisiana, the drugs needed to treat a hemorrhaging miscarriage are now being kept under lock and key with multiple signatures and paperwork needed to release a single dose. It's almost guaranteed that sooner or later someone will bleed to death waiting for the review committee to authorize standard emergency treatment. Also in Louisiana, public health officials are prohibited from recommending that anyone get a flu shot. Story 11. Not really brutal, but if you were to lock a robber in a room until the police get there, you would be charged with taking his freedom, which is illegal. You are not allowed to tie him up either. Story 12. The law regarding involuntary psychiatric hospitalization and treatments. You basically have no defense. A doctor just has to write a couple of things on a form and your life is ruined. No one controls if the doctor is right. You can technically hire a lawyer, but only after the involuntary hospitalization has started. Often, they deny the patient the ability to make calls, and even if they let you call someone, you'd be so heavily sedated that you are unable to talk. I heard tapes of people in this situation. Most lawyers automatically refuse such cases, and if they accept it, by the time they do something, the forced hospitalization has ended. Story 13. A few months ago, a man lost his driving license because he was drunk in his apartment. The police came and spoke to him, and he was able to talk normally despite blowing 0.2. They said he was an alcoholic, and you are not allowed to drive if you abuse drugs or alcohol in Switzerland. Story 14. Haven't read all comments yet, but the brutal anti-abortion laws in the United States, along with the death panel staffed by artificial intelligence at the health insurance companies, are probably up there. Story 15. In the United States, slavery is still legal if convicted of a crime. Many of the prisons actually turn a profit from this. The unwritten law is also that if you possess a certain amount of wealth, then you will never serve any prison time. So we have a for-profit system of slavery for poor people, and everyone is just okay with that. Story 16. Vietnam's punishment for drug crimes is quite unusual. Cannabis, for example, doesn't result in an instant jail sentence compared to harder drugs like methamphetamine or heroin. The limit for a criminal charge is actually 500 grams of cannabis. Below that, it's only a misdemeanor with a fine and compulsory follow-up drug tests. However, if you're caught sharing your cannabis with a friend and smoking together, that's a crime called organizing drug usage and carries a maximum 3-year sentence. So, if you're smoking half a kilogram of cannabis alone, that's a misdemeanor, but getting caught sharing half a gram with someone is a guaranteed prison sentence. Story 17. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution states, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized." However, police can pull you over and order you out of your car for any reason or no reason at all. If you comply with their orders too fast or too slow, they can add additional charges. If the police want to restrain you and you have a normal human reflex to their actions, you can incur a resisting charge. If the police beat you up and you bleed on them, they can charge you for harassing an officer. A short time later, the officers responded to another call from the same residence. The defendant's mother told law enforcement that her son was suicidal and had access to weapons in his room. Officers arrived and attempted to arrest the defendant. He resisted, according to court records, so one of the officers started punching the defendant. Apparently, the defendant bled as a result of the police officer's punching, so prosecutors charged the defendant with harassing the officer by causing him to come into contact with his blood. A jury found the defendant guilty, and he received a sentence of 8 years in prison. The First District affirmed the defendant's conviction and sentence on appeal. Story 18. The state of Iowa in the United States of America is the only state in the country that has absolutely no compassionate release program for terminally ill or elderly inmates. If their sentence is not over yet and they are dying, they will die alone without their families. Story 19. Being forced to give birth to a baby that is not viable could kill me, or I just do not want. Corporations being allowed to use carcinogens in everything we consume, from tampons to spatulas to water bottles. No paid vacation or sick time required by law. Basically, no regulations around owning automatic weapons. The list goes on. United States of America, obviously. Story 20. Smoking weed is technically still illegal. Although it is incredibly rare for people to actually get into serious legal trouble for personal use, it is still technically illegal. This is crazy to me, considering the promise it has shown in other countries and how commonplace weed use is here. Edit. I know it is not exactly brutal or anything, but I do think it is insane that people can still be stopped and detained for being in possession of or smoking weed in this country, considering we are supposed to be a leading country. Story 21. In America, slavery is still very much legal despite what they try to tell you. If you go to jail, they can and very much do legally enslave you. Edit. I have to say, it's concerning the amount of pushback my slavery is bad comment is getting. I even had one person tell me to harm myself. Story 22. Slavery is legal as a punishment for crimes. This creates a massive monetary incentive to arrest and imprison as many people as possible, which is one of the primary reasons for the prison industrial complex in the United States. Story 23. Endless persecution and oppression of political opposition. LGBT equals extremists on a federal level now. I really fear for my and my girlfriend's future sometimes. Story 24. Brazilian criminal law. Article 234. To produce, import, export, acquire, or have in one's possession, for the purpose of commerce, distribution, or public exhibition, any obscene written material, drawing, painting, print, or object. Penalty: detention of 6 months to 2 years or a fine. Artigo 234. Fazer, importar, exportar, adquirir ou ter sob sua guarda, para fim de comércio, de distribuição ou de exposição pública, escrito, desenho, pintura, estampa ou qualquer objeto obsceno. Pena: detenção de 6 meses a 2 anos, ou multa. Story 25. Russia. You can receive up to a 10-year jail sentence for criticizing the war. You can be freed from a sentence and not have a criminal record for even serious crimes if you volunteer to fight in the war. P.S. I do not live in Russia. Story 26. Bill C-63 proposed in Canada means that someone can complain anonymously about anyone, which is then punishable by up to 20,000. Hate crime, which is ill-defined, is punishable by up to life in prison. Story 27. Any part of the National Firearms Act. You have an AR pistol with a 15.99-inch barrel and put a stock or vertical foregrip on it, it's a $250,000 fine and 10 years in federal prison. You have a machine gun that was chopped up in 2 pieces instead of 3, $250,000 fine and 10 years in federal prison. Story 28. A Minority Report level pre-crime is coming to Canada under Bill C-63. It's in the Senate right now to go through second reading, then ascension. Story 29. Not insane or brutal, but being a homosexual is against the law here. I see all the time when gay bars are raided, and people are broadcast on the news looking absolutely terrible. Story 30. I have more than one country as my home, so here they are starting with my birth country. Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act gives the president virtually limitless discretion to use the military as a domestic police force in America. Vagrancy Act 1824. Being homeless is basically illegal in the United Kingdom. Unlawful Activities Prevention Act in India gives the authorities the ability to impose any charges they want on anyone and put them through difficult circumstances. This gives corrupt officers significant leeway to abuse their power. Story 31. It is the laws that have been left on the books in the United States but not enforced for a while, decades, a century, or more, that scare me. We are starting to see more and more of them being enforced arbitrarily when it is decided they do not like somebody, or it can clear a path to do what the politicians want to do rather than passing new legislation. Story 32. From the top of my head, parking your bicycle against a window or door without explicit permission of the owner, looking into the windows of neighbors, no monotonous street music, apparently melodious music is allowed, no-fly zones for pigeons in religious villages on Sundays, gathering acorns or chestnuts in the woods, and locking a burglar in the toilet, deprivation of liberty. This is in the Netherlands. I wouldn't call those laws brutal because they are only fined, but they are insane. Story 33. Not brutal, but some funny laws in Sweden. In the 1950s, young people went out dancing. Older people thought this was strange and were afraid the youth were getting drunk and hooking up after dancing, so dancing publicly without a license or permission became illegal. Businesses needed a license to arrange dances, and if guests spontaneously danced, it had to be stopped. The law was repealed in 2023, but that actually made it worse. Before 2023, you could apply for a 1-year license to arrange dances. Now you have to report every dance event to the police. Another interesting rule is the so-called arcade ban. When video game arcades became popular, parents didn't like their kids hanging out all day in seedy establishments paying to play games. There was a moral panic, with articles suggesting that video game arcades would encourage harmful behavior, as kids without loose change would need to find ways to get money to play the games. The result was that arcades were heavily regulated. If I remember the regulations, it's basically that arcade machines can't be the main source of income for a business. So you can have an arcade machine at a bar, for example, but no places that are purely arcades. The place in my hometown got around this by having an entrance fee while the machines are free to use. Other places will have a machine where you exchange money for generic coins that you can then use at the machines. As a result, arcades are pretty rare in Sweden. Story 34. I believe if you murder a police officer in the south of Ireland, a so-called member of the Garda, capital punishment is still on the books. It's never been carried out in recent times, but it's still on the books. Story 35. Mexico. No, do not resuscitate orders in federally backed healthcare. There's one state that allows it, but since the hospitals are federally administered, they can override it. Story 36. Until 2020, suicide was a criminal act. You would be arrested for attempting, then fined or sentenced to 1 year of prison, which, in my humble opinion, would very likely have made things worse. I was told at some point that if the person attempting suicide successfully died, their body would be taken into police custody and the family would have to pay the fine, but I cannot verify this in Singapore.